DFA teaches you a lot about like the design thinking process, which I think is foundational. Everybody should understand that. But I think what is always lacking is the execution of the designs component. And it doesn't always have to be tech, UX, UI, like that's just one avenue of production, as long as you can turn that vision into a tangible thing. Because in the beginning, I feel like social entrepreneurship in general, it started out as a very academic, theoretical space. Now it's time that we kind of turn those ideas into tangible things that we can experiment and put out there in the world. So I think it's way more important now to develop those production skills, whatever it is. I think tech is just one of the more popular and lucrative ways you can do it.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another podcast episode. This time I have my friend Geronimo with me. So welcome, Geronimo. I thought we would get started with something that we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, with the design space and more specifically social impact. And that's kind of how we became friends. So I wanted to know more about your story in getting into social impact. What was your path to it?
Oh, I love this question. I feel like I nailed my story after doing so many design like job interviews in Silicon Valley. So I like to say that my design journey started with my parents from a very young age. So my dad worked in hospitality in the hotel industry, and my mom worked in government. So I feel like from a very young age that instilled in me the values of like creating great experiences or hosting great experiences for people, for my dad. And then remembering to like root it in community service needs, like my mom working in government. So I think unconsciously growing up, those values have driven all the decisions I've made in my life, up to the point where USC, where I met you, and decided to study social entrepreneurship intentionally. Like I really fell in love with that kind of type of space where you use business to make a social impact, whatever that meant. Honestly, it just sounded good to me then. I had no idea what that meant. And I saw a lot of my peers, go through the business program, getting into like management consulting or investment banking, but that never like made sense to me. Not made sense to me, but skill set wise, like I was more of an empathetic, sensitive guy. Not that those people aren't, but I just wanted to use that skill set more. And then found out about design thinking, eventually did an internship or program called Think Impact that took me to rural Kenya to practice design thinking on the ground. Went through the process, created a social venture out there using like Frog's design toolkit called like Collective Action Toolkit. It was super cool. And yeah, I just got to see firsthand how impactful that method is. And like when I came back to USC, I was super inspired to bring that back to the campus. And that's when we had the inception idea for a design for Social Impact Studio that later turned into DFA. And yeah, so that's kind of my journey up to that point. Post-grad, I thought that I could land some kind of design for social impact job, but honestly, it's such a nascent field. Couldn't really find many career opportunities in this space. Mm-hmm. So I ended up joining my friend's international development startup that took me all the way to Panama to be a design researcher and like interview all the entrepreneurs out there and see how we could support them with creating products or business development for their startups. Safe to say that 3 months later, the startup failed. It's interesting. Sometimes governments won't follow up with their contracts. But I knew that I still wanted to do this kind of work. So I was still excited. I wanted to stay in the social impact space and see if I could provide design strategy, which is what I was calling design thinking at that point. Design research and strategy, if you wanted it to like equate it to what people are doing today. So I eventually landed a job in Washington, D.C. at the nonprofit Ashoka to do some design strategy there internally for the organization and their internal programs, but encountered the problem of like bureaucracy with large nonprofits and just not finding the budget to fund a lot of the opportunities that I discovered through speaking with people internally. And so a really big inflection point in my life was when I participated in my first startup weekend hackathon, which was in DC. The theme was social impact. So I was like, cool, I got that down. I studied it. I've been working in it. I'm a design thinker. I want to contribute my skill in that regard. And after all the teams pitched their ideas for social impact and started creating teams, I would pitch myself as a design thinker. And this one team kind of like, they were asking like, what does that mean? Like, can you make sketches? Can you make prototypes? And I'm like, I can make strategy decks and like talk to customers. And they're like, cool, we need something more tangible. So that's when it hit me really hard that I didn't have, honestly, the production or execution skills to support my design thinking, social innovation background. So that's when I realized that I wanted to quit my job and take a big risk and then move out to Silicon Valley to develop my UX UI skills. And that's kind of what happened. I came out to San Francisco in 2016 during San Francisco Design Week. I was trying to use all my business school skills by going to all the networking events and like selling myself and like showing my portfolio. And honestly, no one wanted to hire me without the actual UX UI experience. So I ended up joining a boot camp called Tradecraft. I made lots of friends. Really got to dive deep into the work and work with a couple of early stage startups pro bono to really get my experience up. I started developing my UX UI skills in 2018 at a startup I was working. I got laid off as such with the volatility of startups. It's not that like they ran out of money. They actually outgrew me. It was a very weird situation. They were in hyper growth and they wanted to move their company to Austin, Texas, because that's where their target market was. And they offered to let me keep my job if I wanted to move to Austin. And I was like, no, I'm not leaving California again after just coming back from the East Coast. So it was kind of a blessing and a curse. It gave me like 6 months to work on my own startup, which is focused on creating economic opportunity for immigrant families through home-cooked meals. And I got to monetize some of my experiences, which was really fun. But then I ran out of savings and I needed healthcare because I aged out of my mom's healthcare insurance. And knew that with all my UX UI skills that I made in the private sector and my social impact background, I didn't want to just join any company again. So I was really intentional that I wanted to return back to the space, but I wanted to do it in the most sustainable way and not get paid for the skills that I do have now.
What do you mean by sustainable way?
In terms of like getting paid a market rate salary and not have to like, I mean, as a empathetic person, I can say that I feel like I'm a person who gives more than they take, and that can lead to burnout. And I guess it's called the martyr complex.
Got it.
I mean, I did interview with some organizations, big names like IDEO.org, really close to the end, but it just wasn't a good fit in terms of sustainability. But Nava, where I work now, was kind of the perfect mix of all of that. Like sustainable, impact-driven, and utilizing my UX UI skills combined with human-centered design. And government was never really on my radar ever in my life. But as I got to talk to the organization more and figure out what projects they were working on, I knew that everything I do in government like is directly related to systemic like impact driven work because you're kind of
It is the
shaping
system.
policy.
Yeah.
It is the system. Yeah. So yeah, I've been here at Nava for like a year and a half now and have learned a lot about civic tech and more specifically like really big on like agile scrum methodologies. So yeah, that's kind of my long-winded story to where I got to today.
Okay. Amazing. There's so much I want to dig into with your story. Okay. So, first off, you studied social entrepreneurship at USC, and that's like a kind of like business plus social impact degree or field of study. What I want to ask is what came first, if any came first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me take it back a little bit more. So like as a kid in this order, I knew that I wanted these careers. I think when I was a child, I wanted to be a lawyer because like my grandpa was a lawyer and my dad made it really seem like this prestigious thing, which it can be. And after that, I think after watching a lot of television, I wanted to be a comedian.
Okay.
And then after that, some point in high school, I wanted to be a psychologist. I just love listening to people's stories and kind of, you know, tailoring solutions for them, which is design.
Yeah.
And I think also when I was like picking up more leadership roles in high school, like alto saxophone section leader, like you have to give like motivational talks to your students. I really love the idea of managing and coaching people and helping them work towards their potential and get better and better. So that made me feel like I wanted to be a manager and study business and organization.
Okay.
So yeah, I mainly cared about business first, but after engaging with a lot of community service, that made me feel like I love doing this work. How can I integrate this into my life or as a career? And then combining like the impact of community service with business and organizations equaled social impact.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Got it. And after having studied that in college and now with all of those like various experiences in social impact, how does it compare? Did you feel prepared in any of your experiences? Is there a lot of things that you wish you would have learned? What's the expectations versus reality?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is that I wish I paid more attention in my business classes because those skills are so invaluable as a designer. Like bringing that analytical approach and like data quantitative driven approach to design, like only makes you it's more of a superpower because design is very qualitative, intuitive, feelings and emotions based, where business really rounds it out with, you know, being more objective, bringing that quantitative data analysis approach. Like I love this quote by Julie Zuo, if people know her. She was like VP of design at Facebook. Which is like diagnose with data and then treat the problem with product and design. And like, wow, that's so simple and clean. Like, I feel like in the design world, a lot of business thinking is like missing. It just having a business mindset helps you read the market better and kind of align what the business needs with what the users need. And that's ultimately what gets implemented and makes the most impact, from my opinion. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question. That's just where my mind went.
No, I think that's a really good aspect of it. I think speaking from, I don't know if I can speak to my own personal experience because I haven't done much social impact in the quote unquote real world, but just hearkening back to our college days, everyone who gets into social impact around that time, I think we're all very like bright-eyed and have very idealistic views of how we're going to change the world, how we can use design to change the world. And maybe as we get older, we're kind of hit by the harsh realities of what systems are in place, et cetera. And I think everybody's had that kind of awakening in the last couple months. So I wanted
Mhm.
to get your take on, I guess, more of the social impact piece of it and how that compares to what we thought of when we were in college.
Oh, that's a deep, that's a deep question. So I'm kind of hopeful for the future of design for social impact, but I'm starting to see where the gaps are. I mean, back then we could locate social problems around our communities and pair up with nonprofits and speak to their community members and develop solutions with them kind of more immediately. But
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to like the real world, I feel like seeing that systemic impact, it's not immediate. Like in tech, you can immediately see that the thing you implemented like a week ago has increased 10% conversion.
Mm-hmm.
But like when it comes to social impact, your timelines are way longer because you're impacting societal problems that you might not see an immediate change for at least a year or years, depending on what type of social challenge you're tackling. Um, so I don't know. I think it requires patience.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I don't know. It's really tough to compare, I guess, the social impact, like the design for social impact space with the broader design space, because I think when people talk about design, people think about tech, right? And tech
Mm-hmm.
is very, very fast paced. Whereas, like to your point, social impact has a longer horizon to see any real change.
For like lasting systemic change, yeah. So actually,
Yeah.
when I think of other business models, so like for example, I'm just going to talk about what I'm trying to create.
Mm-hmm.
It depends what you're measuring. I think measuring impact is always a hot topic, especially in the social impact space, because it's hard to measure some things. But so Rooted Table is a marketplace for cultural home cooked meal experiences. You can think of Airbnb and their experiences platform, but mine is more focused on my personal experience with someone like my mom, who's like an immigrant baby boomer and retired and just stays at home all day and she's bored. But whenever she visits me in the city in San Francisco, or I live in Oakland now, she enjoys cooking for all my friends and like sharing her identity and culture through that medium. And I feel like a lot of my friends are much more open to these cultural immersive experiences and having like the most authentic experience. So, I mean, our objective, my objective, I don't have a team yet, except me and my partner. She does the branding. Um, is to create economic opportunity for like these immigrant people who are kind of left out of the technology equation. You can call it tech equity if you want. So,
Mm-hmm.
kind of utilizing their free time and their retirement to do what they love to do and connect with their community and make supplemental money. And I guess you can immediately measure quick impact by like how many bookings, conversions, things
Mm-hmm.
like that, like quick product analytic things. Um, but ultimately, I guess the hard thing to measure over time is the economic opportunity
Yeah.
and the impact to the population. So it really depends on what your model is, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're
Yeah.
getting really deep into like product thinking now.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. I guess it depends. But speaking of Rooted Table, how did that come about? And actually, I wanted to ask more about just like food in general, because that's something that I know you're very passionate about. And when you started Rooted Table, it was very exciting to see like all of your passions kind of converging with like food, social impact, business, etc. What's the story of Rooted Table?
I think the first part is coming out to the Bay Area. Like you bump heads with all these amazing people and amazing ideas and startups that are trying to get off the ground. where you're cross-pollinating ideas. So I will say that Rooted Table didn't come out of thin air. There was a startup out here that I wanted to join and work with that no longer exists, but they were a marketplace for home cooked meals that you could pick up from your neighbors. I wanted to take it a step further, since I'm more of like, I feel like an experience designer and like the hosting and hospitality aspect. And honestly, like I'm a lover of Anthony Bourdain. And I guess the tagline is like, you get to be the Anthony Bourdain of your own neighborhoods by like going to your neighbor's house and like seeing how they live and like how they shop locally with the same places you shop in, but they shop differently because of their culture. So yeah, the idea sprung off that startup. But whenever my mom would visit and like cook for my friends and kind of share her story of how she came to America and like what this dish means to her and how it connected to all these different people's cultures, like Filipino food. We were serving it to my friend one time and she's Bolivian. She's like, why does this Filipino food remind me of my culture's food? My mom's like, well, like a lot of her food's influenced by Spain. And she's like, whoa, that's amazing. And kind of just seeing that like connection happen and that click happen for my mom and my friend really made me feel like there's an opportunity here to kind of democratize it, I guess. And my hope is that enough cooks, I've done some research in customer validation, and like people like my mom's age who are like 60, she wouldn't like me saying this out loud, 65, 68, oh my god,
in the 60s.
In the
somewhere
60s.
Between 60 and 70.
I'm starting to realize like they may not reliably be able to use the internet the way I'm imagining them to like throw up an Airbnb listing posting like that, but might need support from like me as their immigrant child or a neighbor to help them like set up a listing online where the eaters have no problem finding what they want to eat in their neighborhood. So yeah, I've been working on it. I'm trying to just like MVP the experience. Honestly, the technology is not the hard part. It's the supply and demand of cooks and eaters. So yeah, I've been trying to like shift the way I'm approaching it right now. It's COVID, so we're not allowed to really have in-person things. So I'm trying to figure out how I can keep the mission going and just continue to have people feel connected to their cultures. So thus it's called Rooted Table.
Yeah, that's so cool. I feel like there's totally an opportunity to do some sort of remote solution to that, something like a pick up the food, but you can also have like a Zoom call
That's exactly
to ask questions.
I was thinking like, okay, maybe everyone could pick up the food from like my mom's place and then eat it together over Zoom and she can talk about it. So it's still this kind of like collective experience. But yeah, I just think personally, I'm reading a book right now called The Power of Ritual. I recommend everyone read it, but like there's a lot of power and it's sacred for people to kind of like eat together. And that's really one of the best ways to build community, which is what I care about most. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's like breaking bread. But have you had any Zoom dinners before? Does it translate online?
I haven't tried it yet.
Okay.
I'm actually going to try to explore that with some friends, doing like Zoom dinner portal times. But I mean, it's hard. Like as a person who works in tech, like I have Zoom fatigue, but I have like a craving for community, and the only way to really do it right now is through the computer. So
yeah, that makes sense. I know Zoom happy hours have not really translated very well, at least in my experience, especially if it's more than like 3 people, because you just can't have more than one person talking at a time or else it gets messy. And if you have 20 people in a room, like 90% of the people are just going to be silent, sitting there with the camera in their face. And it's very awkward.
It's hard. My family recently discovered Zoom, and whenever we have family calls, it's a hot mess.
Hmm. How many people on there at one time?
I think there was like at least 20,
Yeah, that's a lot.
and people didn't know how to mute. They didn't know the etiquette, but you can't expect them to know. Yeah,
Of course, of course. That's funny. I wanted to talk a little bit more about like going back to your story on how you got into design. So kind of leaving the social impact part now. But you started off like with social entrepreneurship and had a couple experiences, wanted to get into design, but then realized that you needed like the hard skills. So you did a boot camp. What I guess were, can you talk a little bit more about like the challenges you've faced breaking into design? Because I think that's something a lot of people go through. There's tons of people. I mean, you just see the demand for boot camps is
yeah,
huge. And I'm sure you get questions about that all the time.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, let me jump back into my story a little bit. So, like my last year of USC, I had a feeling that I was lacking the design production skills. So I did sign up for like a nighttime class at the Art Center of Design in
Mm-hmm.
Pasadena,
Mm-hmm.
like a product design course there, which actually was more of an industrial design class. Where essentially what we did was we had assignments pretending we had clients like Red Bull and had to sketch like hundreds of iterations of a physical product for them, which kind of taught me even more about the product or design process in general, just creating many, many versions, and then tying it to the story and the business value. Actually, sorry, this is kind of tangential to your question, but a
Sure.
very big insight in my life, which was so I was presenting my sketches in my design class. And we pinned it to the walls. And I don't know, it was more natural for me to tell a story about the product. Like I told a story on how I envisioned the user of the product to use it and in what scenarios. So one, our example was design a popsicle for Red Bull.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was fun. And I had different concepts. One of my concepts was like a popsicle shaped like glass and broke like glass, because if you think about Red Bull as a brand, it's very extreme. um, who tends to drink it? Athletes or party people. Like
Mm-hmm.
those are the general audiences. So I thought like it would be cool to like break the glass and then put it in your like vodka and like drink it that way, or just suck
Okay.
on it and like it's like dangerous, like you're eating glass. And I kind of told the story that way, and like, oh, you're like partying, you're going to a bar and you're kind of drunk and you get this Red Bull popsicle. So I kind of told it in that sense and sold the story. And my professor at the time was like, Geronimo, who are you? Like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm Filipino and I'm a student. She's like, no, like, what do you like? You just like sold it to me. Like, you have the skill of selling your concept. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a business student.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, that's how you're supposed to like talk about your designs.
Yes.
That's when like marrying business and design really kind of made sense to me.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up, just because I feel like storytelling is such an underrated skill in the design space specifically, and especially people who are trying to break in. Like I talk to a lot of like aspiring designers or aspiring UXers, and specifically in like the interview process, the advice I always give is just to be able to tell your story really well. Your story and the story of any sort of project that you're talking over, like if you nail that, that really really makes you stand out, because people think so much about their hard skills, especially if they've gone to school for design. You know, they pretty much got that down, but the storytelling really makes a big difference.
Yeah. So it's making me think there are like some broad skill sets that you should have if you're approaching design in general. And there are some skill sets that you should have if you're approaching like digital design, which I think is a bit different. So like in design school, even though I only took like one class,
Mhm.
it was more about like as many iterations as possible. But I think in digital design, although you can do that more, I don't think it's needed to do as many like sketch 100 things. You don't have to do
Yeah.
that in design. Maybe like have 3 or 4 alternatives if you have the time or capacity, but it's not necessary because it's more important to like put it out there and test it, which I feel like you can do a lot more in the private sector, and in the social impact sector, not as much because
Mhm.
there's more at stake. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, back to your original question. So I've been speaking to a lot of designers who have come out of DFA or started DFA in their own schools, because a lot of them have landed here in the Bay Area. And, some of them have landed jobs at like Gensler,
Mhm.
the architecture firm.
And for people listening, can you just quickly explain what DFA is?
DFA is a national organization that, different colleges can create their own studios, and they work on design projects that make a social impact in their communities.
Yes.
And students can use like all their interdisciplinary skills and contribute that to the studio.
Yes. DFA, the highlight of my college career. Love it.
But yeah, recently I spoke to a DFA alum, and she was working at Gensler as a design strategist and was interested in breaking in UX and UI. And what we talked a lot about is DFA teaches you a lot about like the design thinking process, which I think is foundational. Everybody should understand that. But I think what is always lacking is the execution of the designs component. And it doesn't always have to be tech, UX, UI. Like that's just one avenue of production. Like you can be a graphic designer, you can be an architect, as long as you can turn that vision into a tangible thing. Like I feel like that is what's lacking in the space, because in the beginning, I feel like social entrepreneurship in general been around for a while now, but it started out as a very academic, theoretical space. And now it's time that we kind of turn those ideas into tangible things that we can experiment and put out there in the world. So I think it's way more important now to develop those production skills, whatever it is. I think tech is just one of the more popular and lucrative ways you can do it these days.
Yeah, absolutely agree. That's a good segue into a discussion about being a generalist versus a specialist. And I feel like you and I have talked about that many times, and we've both had our own kind of struggles because I think we've both started out as generalists, and now we are kind of like within our own specialist fields. You're a designer, I'm a researcher. I guess you're in a hybrid role. But do you feel that it's very, very important to specialize given what we just talked about?
I feel like, so it depends. It depends on the organization and whatever your personal goals are. I think if you're at a smaller company or at a startup or a more medium-sized organization, being a generalist can be very helpful. You can do a little bit of everything. And then as the organization scales and they need more specialists within certain departments, that's when it becomes more important. It's not always the case. You can still have very large organizations that still have generalists, but it just really depends on how they form the organizations and departments. But I think everyone should generally, yes, start out as generalists so you can have a baseline understanding of the whole design process end to end, from having the vision or just the idea of to explore something, and then down to putting it in front of users and testing it and validating it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like in my personal experience, like my background in business has only defined me more and more into what I guess you can call a growth designer now, which is still very much a designer with all the generalist skills, but really focused on business impact and value and focused on the data. Like, how are we tying our work to higher level business objectives? So in one of my previous jobs, the Airbnb for RVs and camper vans. So I've worked in all types of Airbnb type of places. For example, like you want to get the customer to book an RV as seamless as possible. So like, how are my designs influencing the outcome of booking transactions? So like over time, has my design increased booking transactions by 10%? So really making that the focus in figuring out where you can unlock value for the company. So that I would say that takes much more of a business-minded analytical approach and not just loving the qualitative data, but loving the quantitative data. Yeah.
This is something that is kind of on my mind more and more, but speaking from personal experience, like I think I started off my journey much more as a generalist, and then similar to you, felt like I needed to specialize a little bit more to get hired, because I don't think a lot of generalists get hired at an entry level. But as you progress in your career, I think it's more important to think about these like larger business issues. And I feel like it's kind of a switch in your brain where you have to step back from like the trees, I guess, from where you're at, to look at the broader forest. But have you found that to be difficult, or like do you have to compartmentalize in your brain to think in those certain ways?
I think I know what you're alluding to. Yes, I would say my brain goes back and forth all the time between creative and analytical. Not that you can't be both, but in my current job, I've had to flex a lot of strategic planning and a lot of production. So I'm a type of designer that's more biased towards just creating the thing and going along the way in the process and figuring out what we need to do next, which I feel like doesn't really work well with your higher level stakeholders and supervisors. Like they want to see the overall plan.
Right.
Like, what are your objectives? What is your timeline? Where do you expect to check in? What are some deliverables and outputs? Or I'm more of an experiment driven person to like just do the thing as fast as possible, put it out there, and then adjust along the way, which doesn't work well with budgets and constraints and capacity planning. So I've had to learn how to like stretch my bigger picture brain, part of my brain, to take a step back and think about like, okay, what else? What is everyone else doing, and how does the way I approach my work affect what might happen on that side, like in terms of resources and engineering and things like that.
So do you think that that is something that you would have thought of more towards the beginning of your journey as more of a generalist before you started to get into the design stuff? What I'm starting to see, and I'll explain a little bit more of like how this connects to me personally, because I think starting out, I thought a lot about the bigger picture, because I think when you're getting into a space, you try to scope out the whole thing. And then when you get hired to do a job, you're very focused on the thing that you're doing. And for me personally, like sometimes I'll step back, or I'm forced to step back when stakeholders ask questions, and I'm like, I actually didn't think about that before because I was so focused on the work, but this is not typical of me to not think about these things. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. What I've done I think that's happened to me, and what I've done to adjust to that feedback is like doing so many syncs and reporting, and like every Monday of the week, I sync with like my product manager and tech lead, and not just do a status update, because I think status updates need to be async. Like that's not a good use of time. Like if we're going to talk to each other, let's discuss problems and come to solutions or any shifts in priority. And yeah, oftentimes there is a shift in priority, where my product manager will say like, our stakeholders have come to this, they want this. Like, how can you fit that in your current workload? And I personally freak out. And I'm like, oh my God, everything's on fire. Like, how do I stack rank which is more important to work on? They're both equally important. But over time, I've learned that, like, no, put that in the backlog. Like, if they want a quality thing right now, I'm going to focus on this first.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll revisit that in 2 weeks when I've made some progress on this and evaluate where should I put this on my work plate.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just something I've learned over time.
Yeah. I think to your story, like, if you have the luxury of having a good project manager, they can be very instrumental in that balance.
Yeah. I mean, the best product manager and project manager relationships I've had is it's never authoritarian. They work with me and they're like, hey, look at the data. This seems important. Can you like shift some of your focus or energy on this? And they storytell. Like, they convince me with like evidence and argument, and I agree or disagree sometimes. It's not top down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So unless you have more to say on the design or social impact front, I wanted to switch gears over to something very different, onto relationships and romance.
Whoa. Okay.
If you're open to talking about it.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess I don't have necessarily specific questions, but I mean, we've been friends for a good amount of time, and you are now in a long-term relationship, but that has not always been the case. So I just wanted to hear from you of like, how is it? And how'd you get here?
Great. Important question. I think it was a long time coming. It's funny how it all happened because I put out the intention. Like, I knew that I wanted something like this, and it came to me very fast. But yeah, I've never really had a real girlfriend, long-term girlfriend or partner in my entire life until as of 2 years, 2-ish years.
2-ish years.
I hope she doesn't watch this. I think it was in 2018 where, it's funny, I did a leadership program and it just made me think about all the things I really want and want to get down on paper. And one of them was like relationships. Like, I want to learn what it's like to be in a committed, intimate, real relationship with someone who supports my goals and I support their goals. And basically that's just the basis of the foundation, like, to help each other be their best versions of themselves, which I think we do most of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so what happened was I'm part of this social impact fellowship called Starting Block. I would always come back during like different summits and institutes to be a mentor, just because I love welcoming in new fellows to the community. And I've been doing it since 2015, so 3 years at the time. And this institute was particularly located in New Orleans. And so I never met my partner, Kelsey, before. That's her name. I think I've seen her design portfolio float around on the Facebook community group. And I'm like, oh, cool, there's another designer in this group. And she's done some cool projects. She's lived in Spain, where I studied abroad. And she got her master's in Spain. And she started a project there about food and having refugees in Spain share their culture through food. And I'm like, oh my God, we like the same things. She's also a photographer. When I arrived in New Orleans to the Institute and all the mentors got to meet each other, I was like, oh, you're that girl behind that portfolio. Like, I'm a fan of your work. And I think that translated into flirting. I think I generally just talk like that to people. She's like, oh, he sees me. He sees me.
Yeah.
And we just started talking and realized, like, wow, we're nearly the same person. My birthday September 2, her birthday September 4. Designer, photographer, social impact, Spain. Like, there's just so many parallels that we clicked. And even though we only spent a week together, there. That space that's created with that social innovation fellowship is very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we got to know each other very quickly. And by the end of the week, we're like, how do we make this work? Because she lived in Baltimore at the time. And then we did long distance for a year, talking nearly every day and traveling back and forth. She would come to San Francisco, I would go to Baltimore. And after a year, she moved out here with me. And now we're living together and learning how to do that and continue to support each other in being our best selves. But what I love about our story is that we started out as friends, because long distance kind of forces you to do that. Like, you're just conversing back and forth. There's like no physical things unless we like came together. I really like I just love the way we met.
Yeah. I'm so happy for you. So let's go back to kind of what you said in the beginning, where you were like, I put out this intention of I want to learn what it's like to be in a relationship. And it happened very quickly, or it came to you very quickly. What's, I guess, the history before you put out that intention? Was it not your intention before? And what changed to make you make that intention?
I think so. My leadership program is another one. I do a bunch. My program made me realize like you can't get what you want unless you know what you want or have an idea of what you want. Because if you don't, you're just waiting for things to fall in your lap and you don't really know if that's what you wanted or not. So it's really a reflection practice on, like, I've had a friend who's now a coach. She was like, just write down all the attributes and traits and qualities that you want in a partner. I feel like a lot of people do that. Maybe not a lot, but some people
do that like mentally, maybe not
but
like a physical list.
I think you need to make a physical list, whether you look at it again or not. But the act of doing it makes it more concrete and creates more retention in your brain. That's scientific, even though you may not remember, but the back of your mind does. I feel like in a lot of cases, maybe you make a long list. There's probably only like 3 or 4 things that are really core to that. And they're most likely internal qualities. And if not, that's fine. You're a human being. And I feel like when I met my partner, she really hit the most important ones that mattered to me, like very family oriented, cares about food, very kind, and committed to growth. Right? So yeah, that's kind of why I love her.
So sweet. I love this stuff. You know I love this stuff.
It's new for me. I'm learning a lot, and it's it's funny. So it's COVID, right? Like this is also a true test to relationships, I would say. Like there's no breaks with you and your partner.
Yeah.
Maybe if you like once in a while, like you go for a walk and they go for a walk or something, but like now we are seeing everything all the time.
How has that changed things, if anything?
It works well. Like we're fine, but I know that I'm a person who needs alone time. Sometimes you just need to like spend time alone. Like, so I'll walk around the park or lake. I don't know. I think distance is also important. So,
So kind of speaking about distance, but the first year of your relationship was long distance. How was that experience for you? I know you talked about the friendship aspect of it, but especially being like your first real relationship and having the first year of it be long distance, how was that? I guess you don't have anything to compare to, huh? But what was it like?
I loved it because we got to have great conversations all the time, and it kept us alive, and we were friends, and we created that feeling of trust and safety over the phone. And that anytime we met each other in person, like it was the best experience ever. I don't know what to describe it as, but like, oh my God, I get to see you in person again. I get to hold you and hug you. And then we're so cheesy. Like whenever I come to the train station in like Baltimore, I would like come with flowers and like do those kinds of things. I always think about doing it again these days, but I forget. because my mind is racing during COVID all the time, thinking about so many things. I don't know why. But I don't know. It wasn't hard. Maybe because I didn't have anything to compare it to, but I almost preferred it because it just made our conversations more, I keep using this word, but like sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I really appreciated talking to her all the time and not relying on a physical connection. But that was the treat.
That is really nice. I think that, long distance probably gets like a bad reputation, but I guess it's also different because it was the start of a relationship. So to your point, it kind of starts it off more on a friendship note than most relationships.
I won't say it'll work for everyone, because I think there's the aspect of like, does your in-person being match the other person? So for example, she's very neat and organized, and I'm very sometimes neat and organized. Sometimes. But we are like, for example, you saw our apartment, like we're both designers. She's also a product manager, but the fact that we can create a special space with each other and appreciate it and grow it, I think is a big component. And if you can't match on those regards, that can be very difficult.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned how something that is kind of foundational to your relationship is just like helping each other grow and helping each other kind of like be the best versions of yourself. What are some of the ways that you guys do that?
First thing that comes to mind is communication. So like
key
running into the difficult conversations, like straight into them. Like I'm still working on it, but when something really bothers you, learning how to communicate effectively and kind of like feedback, like you want constructive criticism privately, but like praise publicly. So use that in your relationships too. So, whenever I feel like something she's doing like makes me feel a type of way, start with that. So like, can we talk about this thing, so you can like preemptively start working towards that conversation, and they can expect that, oh, this is serious. I mean, you start with like, I felt this way when you did this, because I mean, if your partner loves you, I feel like they care about your feelings. So they know that something is impacting you a certain way, instead of pointing fingers and blaming, like, you always do this thing. Like, I would never use the word always, because that's just triggering for everyone, no matter who you are.
Yeah. No one always does anything. So
but that's all you're seeing in the moment. That's why, or in those moments. So that's why that might be the first thing that someone might use. So communication and like just giving them the chance or opportunity to adjust, and then knowing that, they're a human being just like you, and there's probably patterns that they have that they're not aware of that you can shed light on. So I would say that's the first one. There's something that I've always wanted to do that I haven't gotten around to. It's funny and it's sad, but I think it might be cool. Like, wanted to do like retrospectives. Like, like, I don't know, maybe once a month we can like look back and like create a space for feedback. Like, hey, this last month you haven't been putting the dishes away as much. Like, can you fix that? So in this, we do that in spirit, not in practice. So just also like feedback. It's not personal. Like, we're both in this together. Where can we be equals, and where might I be short on, and be honest and go like, honestly, like, I'm really bad at this thing. Just making you aware that you might have to do more of that.
All right. There's a lot there. I really like what you said about the praise publicly, criticize privately. I'm probably butchering it, but that is so key. I think that's so, I don't know. I always find like if there's public criticism, it's just not very tasteful for a partner.
I mean, like in any situation, but especially a partner, because like you want them to be your cheerleader around your friends and family, and make you look good and be your hype man or hype girl or hype person.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
I think there is room for like ranting. I mean, at least amongst like your group of friends, like you need to have some people that you can kind of go to when inevitably anybody's partner kind of like drives them a little bit crazy.
Oh
There
yeah.
are always those times, but I think choosing those people very carefully is important because those people need to have your partner's best interests at heart as well.
Yeah. Yeah. To add to that, yeah, I think there's time and space for those kinds of conversations. But like if you're at like a party or like a birthday party or
Yeah,
a networking event, like that's probably not the
don't
time
do
and
that.
space.
No.
Yeah. So maybe like I hang out at home or something, you know.
Yeah.
I wonder if there was anything else. I feel like there's always a ton. Like I actively try to think about how I can improve my relationship. I listen to podcasts. Like,
What are some of the podcasts you listen to for that?
oh my God, so many. Jay Shetty's good all around.
Oh
I love
yeah,
Jay Shetty.
I love Jay
Um,
Shetty too.
there is a, I think she's a psychiatrist, psychologist. Her name is Esther Perel.
Very, very famous. Yeah.
Very famous. That's the two that come to mind, and kind of just take action on the things they recommend. Some seem too ambitious, like Jay
Mm.
Shetty, like every month goes on a 3-day vacation, 3 hours away with his wife, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh shit, I wish I could do that.
Yeah. That does sound really nice. I heard him talk about that too, and I was like, oh, that's so amazing. But I think a lot of the times, like for him, and then I also listen to Tim Ferriss, and he doesn't talk about his relationship very much, but he does sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And at least for both of them, I feel like they reached a point where it wasn't that great, and so they had to implement something like the 3-day 3 hours type of thing. Whereas, I feel like you probably haven't gotten to that point, but it is always good to be proactive about kind of keeping your relationship in a good space.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I did that Jay Shetty advised was just like make a list of 10 qualities that you love about your partner and write it down and then read it to them, which I feel like we don't do as often as we should.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That
I
was fun.
also, yeah, I also think with the pandemic, a lot of these like gestures kind of fall to the wayside, like what you said about like the flowers, and even just like normal things like telling your partner things that you like about them, or just like any sort of show of affection has kind of fallen to the wayside, or we forget about it because we're with them all the time. So
Yeah.
there's no I miss you because you're with them all the time. So that kind of stuff you kind of have to artificially bake it back in.
Yeah. It's interesting. So we're not super consistent on this. Should probably put on the calendar, but we've tried to reserve Thursdays as date night.
Hmm.
And I think before COVID, sometimes we would like go out to movies or like do something or explore the city or some other neighboring city. But now in COVID, like we try to do that sometimes, have like Thursdays intentional date night, but we run out of activities. It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
it's the same thing as Monday and Tuesday night, just watch Netflix on the couch for hours.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's not much to do. And I
Yeah.
think there is room to be extra creative. Like I've literally Googled it online. Like what kind of COVID dates are there?
Uh-huh.
And like just like lay a picnic blanket on the floor of your apartment and like light some candles. And I'm like, I don't know. It sounds too cute, but personally for me, it doesn't seem like enough. But it's not about me.
It seems very simple, but I feel like these little changes can probably make a big difference. And I'm not speaking from experience, but this weekend we went to Target, and like I think the typical COVID date is like watch Netflix at home, maybe eat some food, whatever. But we bought some like candy, which is reminiscent of like movie theater candy that comes in the boxes, and we're like, oh, we should
Nice.
just do like a movie night with themed snacks, and that'll be a little bit more extra than what we normally do.
That sounds nice. I might take that idea from you.
Yeah.
One idea we've been trying to explore is outdoor movie theaters, which
Mm-hmm.
there are a few. maybe we'll do it. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to do that too. I've never actually been to one before, even pre-COVID. So that
It's
always
worth
sounds really
a
fun.
try.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like we're reaching a good stopping point. We've covered a lot of ground.
I think we did. Yeah, we did.
I feel like this was very insightful and also just interesting and a good catch up.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Geronimo.